Hello folks! Today we'll talk about something that affects all of us: inflation. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but hear me out. Did you know that inflation can significantly impact your wealth and budget? That's right, rising prices can mean trouble for your savings, investments, and ability to borrow money. But don't worry, we're not here to scare you. We're here to help you understand the 10 potential impacts of inflation on your finances. Get some coffee, take a seat, and let's chat about what the future of inflation could mean for your wallet. Number 1. Inflation erodes purchasing power. Did you know that inflation is like a sneak attack on your wallet? It's like when you go to a fancy restaurant where the prices are so high you wonder if they're selling unicorn meat. But in reality, it's just good old inflation nibbling away at your purchasing power. And it doesn't matter if the inflation rate is 2% or 4%, you'll still feel the squeeze. Comparing it to like running a marathon with ankle weights on, you might make it to the finish line, but you'll definitely feel the burn. And if inflation keeps doubling, you'll feel the burn even faster than a scorching hot pizza out of the oven. So keep an eye on the Consumer Price Index and the PCE Price Index, because they'll provide a reasonable estimate of the cost your wallet's about to take a beating. And don't worry folks, we have some tips and tricks to help you fight against inflation and keep your purchasing power intact. So let's give inflation the old 1-2 punch and show it who's boss. Number 2. Inflation disproportionately impacts lower income consumers. The value of money depreciates over time as a result. Lower income consumers tend to feel the pinch even more. They typically spend more of their income on necessities like food and energy. And let's face it, we all need to eat and keep the lights on. Now, policymakers and financial gurus like core inflation excluding food and energy prices, because they're more volatile. But that doesn't mean the prices of these commodities don't affect people's wallets, especially those with lower incomes. To make matters worse, low-income people are less likely to own assets like real estate, which has traditionally served as a hedge against inflation. But wait, there's more. The good news is that Social Security recipients and other federal transfer payment recipients receive the cost of living adjustments, COLA, based on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, CPIW. So at least they have some protection against the impact of inflation. Number 3. Inflation keeps deflation at bay. Well, it's like the old saying, a little bit of inflation never hurts anybody. The Federal Reserve's target inflation rate is 2% over the long run. It's like the Goldilocks zone of inflation, not too hot or cold, it's just right. This helps keep prices stable and employment high. Plus, a little inflation can grease the wheels of commerce and provide a cushion in case of overestimating inflation or facing deflation. But let's not forget about the lenders out there. They can charge interest to offset inflation and make a little extra coin. And borrowers can benefit too, as inflation can make future repayments with inflated currency a little easier. Now, why do we even need inflation in the first place? Well, it's like trying to get your hair cut. Sometimes you need a little trim to keep things looking fresh. Inflation can help keep wages and prices in check, preventing businesses from resorting to layoffs during tough times. Plus, a wage freeze can act like a sneaky cut in labor costs without all the fuss of layoffs. But let's not get too comfortable with inflation. It's like a fickle friend who can turn on you anytime. If price hikes exceed the expected rate, inflation can spiral out of control and wreak havoc on the economy. It's kind of like your friend who says they'll only have one drink but then ends up doing a keg stand. Number 4. Inflation feeds on itself when it's high. Inflation can benefit the economy like a sprinkle of salt on your fries. It adds flavor and keeps things moving along. But too much of it can make you feel like you're drowning in a sea of rising prices, like trying to swim through a pool full of dollar bills. If inflation stays steady, people generally don't panic. But if it starts rising too fast, everyone gets a little jumpy. Workers start demanding more money, businesses start raising their prices, and before you know it, we're all in a wage price spiral. And if we're not careful, we could end up like Zimbabwe, where people need a whole wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread. So let's hope the policymakers know what they're doing and don't accidentally lead us down the road to hyperinflation. Number 5. Inflation raises interest rates. When it comes to managing inflation, central banks have a big job to do. Their goal is to keep inflation in check and within their target range, typically around 2% in developed economies and a bit higher in emerging ones. To do this, they use a monetary policy, which involves adjusting interest rates to influence borrowing costs and the money supply in the economy. So if inflation rises and threatens to exceed the central bank's target, policymakers can raise interest rates to make borrowing more expensive. This in turn makes it harder for businesses and consumers to access credit, slowing down spending and dampening inflationary pressures. Of course, there are downsides to raising interest rates as well. For example, it can dampen borrowing for boats or new business expansion projects, which may suddenly seem less appealing when monthly payments are higher. But on the other hand, rising interest rates also make it more attractive to save, since the risk-free rate of return on newly issued treasury bonds also tend to rise. So it's a balancing act for central banks to use monetary policy to keep inflation under control without harming the overall economy too much. Number 6. Inflation lowers debt service costs. You borrow $1,000 at a 5% annual interest rate, and then, to your horror, annual inflation shoots up to 10%. But hold on, don't panic just yet. Because, thanks to inflation, the decline in your inflation-adjusted loan balance will offset your interest costs. You're paying off your debt with money that's worth less than what you borrowed. It's like a magic trick, but instead of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, you're paying off your loans with invisible money. But beware, not all loans are created equal. Adjustable rate mortgages, credit card balances, and home equity lines of credit, HELOCs, typically allow lenders to raise their interest rates to keep pace with inflation and Fed rate hikes. So if you're planning to borrow money, read the fine print and know what you're getting into. Number 7. Inflation lifts growth and employment in the short term. Higher inflation can lead to faster economic growth. While the 1970s are often remembered as a time of stagflation, authentic gross domestic product, GDP, in the US increased by an average of 3.2% annually between 1970 and 1979, well above the economy's average growth rate since then. When inflation is high, people are less likely to save because the value of their savings decreases over time. This can encourage people to spend more money and businesses to invest more in expanding their operations. Initially, unemployment tends to decline as inflation rises. A historical correlation between unemployment and inflation is known as the Phillips curve. Higher inflation can stimulate demand and lower inflation-adjusted labor costs, leading to job growth. However, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Eventually, the consequences of persistently high inflation must be faced. It can lead to a painful economic downturn that resets expectations or even results in chronic underperformance. Number 8. Inflation can cause painful recessions. This is called the inflation-unemployment trade-off, where policymakers must decide whether to tolerate higher inflation to keep jobs or fight inflation at the risk of job losses. But the problem is, if inflation runs wild for too long, it can turn into a vicious cycle of rising prices and wages, like a runaway train heading straight for the economy. And when that happens, the Fed has to hit the brakes hard by raising interest rates to the moon and back. But that can cause unemployment to go through the roof, leaving job seekers stuck on a roller coaster that only goes up. Number 9. Inflation hurts bonds and growth stocks. Bonds are like that steady, reliable friend who's always there to lend you a few bucks. But when inflation hits, they turn into that flaky friend who cancels plans at the last minute. See, inflation makes the income stream for bonds less valuable over time. And if interest rates go up to combat inflation, the value of previously issued bonds can drop like a rock. The market says, hey, these bonds aren't as cool as they used to be, I'm moving on to newer, hotter bonds. As for stocks, it's a mixed bag. Some stocks, like tech and consumer companies, don't do well in high inflation environments. It's like their profits are on a diet or something. But other stocks might thrive in those conditions. It's a game of musical chairs. Nobody knows who will be left standing when the music stops. Number 10. Inflation boosts real estate, energy, and value stocks. Real estate has been a popular choice for investors looking to hedge against inflation. Landlords can protect themselves by raising rents, which can help offset the effects of inflation on their fixed-rate mortgages. Historically, real estate's been one of the few assets that have maintained its value during periods of high inflation. When inflation rises, it's often because of rising commodity prices. Commodities like oil, gas, and metals are in high demand during periods of economic growth. But when the economy slows down, commodity demand can decrease, leading to a price drop. However, some commodities like energy have historically continued to outperform even during periods of economic slowdown or recession. That's why energy equities and real estate investment trusts, REITs, have been popular investments during inflation. Value stocks have also historically outperformed during these periods as investors look for companies that can maintain their profitability in the face of rising costs. Thanks for watching our video. If you found this YouTube video interesting and you want to see more, please leave us a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Click the bell icon below to be notified periodically or whenever we upload one. Up to you. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the following video.